The first time my parents suggested giving my house to my brother, I laughed. The second time they were measuring rooms. For context, I'm a 32-year-old software developer. My company is based in California, but I've been working remotely for years. Last summer, after saving aggressively and skipping pretty much every luxury imaginable, I finally bought my first home. Nothing huge, just a comfortable 3-bedroom place in a quiet Ohio suburb. It was the biggest accomplishment of my life. My older brother, Ryan, lives about 20 minutes away with his wife and their 3 kids. They've been struggling financially for years and are squeezed into a small apartment that's honestly too crowded for a family of 5. I've always sympathized with their situation. What I didn't expect was for my parents to decide that my solution should be giving them my house. It started during a family dinner a few weeks ago. At first, the conversation seemed harmless. My mom asked, "So you're still working from home every day?" "Yeah," I said. "Pretty much." Then came the usual questions. "You don't ever have to go into an office?" "No." "So you're just home all day?" I explained, for what felt like the 1000th time, that working remotely doesn't mean I'm sitting around doing nothing. My days are packed with meetings, deadlines, coding, and managing projects. My dad nodded but gave me that look people have when they already decided not to believe you. "Still," he said, "it's different from a regular job. I should have noticed the warning signs." I didn't. Then my mom put down her fork and said, "We've been talking about something." The way she said it immediately made me nervous. She smiled. "Since you work from home, do you really need a whole house?" I thought she was joking. Seriously, I laughed. Nobody else did. That's when I realized this conversation had been planned. My dad actually pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I'm not exaggerating. A sheet of paper. He started listing reasons why it would make more sense for my brother's family to live in my house instead of me. According to him, a family with children needs space more than a single person. Remote workers don't really need a full house. I could easily move into my parents' basement. My brother's kids deserve bedrooms. And helping family should come before personal comfort. I sat there staring at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You want me to leave the house I bought and pay for, move into your basement, and let Ryan's family move into my place?" "You're making it sound unreasonable," my mom replied. "Because it is unreasonable." My brother suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. His wife kept saying things like, "Oh, we'd never ask for that." But she said it while smiling at the idea. You know when someone says no but clearly means yes? That. Then my mom delivered the comment that really got under my skin. "You're not even using the house properly." I blinked. "What does that even mean?" "You have 2 empty bedrooms." "They aren't empty. One room is my office. The other is a music studio where I record and produce tracks as a side business. It brings in a decent amount of extra income every month." Apparently none of that counted. My mom waved her hand dismissively. "Hobbies aren't the same thing as children." I tried explaining that I bought the house with my own money. I pay every bill, every tax, every repair, every mortgage payment. None of that mattered. My dad actually said, "Well, it's not like you earned it the hard way." I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "What? You sit at home all day?" "Ryan drives to work every morning. That's a real job." That one stung more than I expected. Not because I think my job is harder than my brother's. It isn't a competition. But I'd spent years building my career. Long nights. Certifications. Weekend projects. Constant learning. Hearing my own father dismiss all of that because my office happened to be inside my house felt insulting. I left dinner shortly afterward. I figured everyone would cool off and realize how ridiculous the conversation had been. Instead, things got worse. A lot worse. A few days later, my mom started texting me paint samples for the basement she wanted me to move into. At first I thought she was kidding. She wasn't. Then she sent me a rough floor plan. She had actually drawn sections labeled things like desk area, sleeping space, storage, as if my relocation had already been approved. The next week she asked what color flooring I preferred. A few days after that, she casually texted asking when she could borrow my house keys so my sister-in-law could start planning bedrooms for the kids. I stared at that message for a solid minute. Then I replied, "You are not getting keys to my house." Her response came back almost immediately. "You're being selfish." According to her, I was hoarding space that rightfully should be benefiting the family. Then my dad called. He told me he was disappointed in me. That family should come first. That a man who works from home shouldn't need a 3-bedroom house while children are stuck sharing rooms. And then he said something that has been stuck in my head ever since. A real family needs that house more than you do. At that moment, I started wondering if they genuinely believed I would eventually give in. And honestly, that thought bothered me more than anything else. For the record, I don't spend my workdays lounging around in sweatpants playing video games. I lead a team spread across multiple states. I spend hours in meetings. I handle deadlines worth more money than I've ever personally seen. My company trusts me with systems that thousands of customers rely on every day. But according to my parents, none of that counted because my commute was 20 feet from my bedroom to my office. After reading hundreds of comments on my original post, I started wondering if maybe I hadn't been firm enough. Maybe they genuinely thought this was some kind of negotiation. So I sat both of my parents down and tried one last time. Calm voice. No arguing. I explained that my house was not community property. It wasn't a family asset. It wasn't a vacation cabin everyone got to vote on. It was my home. A home I bought with my money. I told them I loved them, but the conversation was over. No one was moving in. No one was getting keys. No one was making decisions about my property except me. My parents nodded through the whole conversation. My mom even smiled. We understand, she said. For a second, I thought we had finally reached reality. Then she added, so when do you want help packing? I should have known right then that nothing had gotten through to them. A week later, things exploded. I was in the middle of an important work meeting. The kind where half a dozen executives are staring at spreadsheets while everyone pretends not to panic. My phone suddenly started vibrating nonstop. At first I ignored it. Then my video doorbell sent alert after alert after alert. I muted myself and checked the camera feed. My stomach dropped. There was a moving truck parked in my driveway. Not a rental van. A full-sized moving truck. Standing beside it were my parents, my brother, his wife, and several people carrying boxes. For a second I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. Then I saw one of the movers walking toward my front porch. I immediately excused myself from the meeting and ran downstairs. The second I opened the door, my mother beamed at me. There he is. Like she'd arrived for a birthday party. We're here to help make the transition easier. The transition to what? I asked, even though I already knew. Behind her, my father was directing traffic. Put the bedroom furniture in first, he told one of the movers. He'll need time to move his office equipment. My office equipment. Inside my house. The house they apparently no longer believed belonged to me. I stepped directly into the doorway. No. Everyone froze. No one is bringing a single thing into this house. My mother sighed dramatically. Michael, don't do this. Do what? Make everything difficult. My sister-in-law crossed her arms. We're just trying to think about the kids. I stared at her. The kids who already have a place to live? The look she gave me suggested I had personally insulted her. Then things got even more ridiculous. My mom actually tried stepping around me. Physically. As if she could simply walk into my house because she had decided the argument was over. I blocked the doorway. You need to leave. We already talked about this. No, I said. You talked about it? I said no. Several times. My dad suddenly pulled out his phone. Look. I wish he hadn't. Because what he showed me made my blood boil. It was a family group chat. One I wasn't included in. The conversation went back over a week. They had been planning the move in detail. Detail. My sister-in-law asking whether my washer had a delicate cycle. My brother discussing where he'd store his tools. My mother brainstorming furniture layouts. My father calculating how much money my brother's family would save once they stopped paying rent. There were even messages about future family vacations using the money they expected to save. Not once in the entire conversation did anyone question whether I had agreed. Not once. They acted like my house was already theirs. Like I was simply being relocated. Reading those messages felt surreal. I wasn't a person in those plans. I was an obstacle. A logistical issue. A piece of furniture that needed to be moved somewhere else. I handed my father's phone back. Then I said something I never thought I'd say to my own family. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. The reaction was immediate. My mom burst into tears. Not hurt tears. Furious tears. The kind designed to make everyone around her feel guilty. I can't believe you'd threaten your own family. I had reached my limit. What exactly have you done that gives you ownership of my house? Her eyes widened. We raised you. I laughed. Actually laughed. You mean when I was a child? That's called parenting. My father's face instantly darkened. Watch your mouth. No. For the first time in my life I wasn't backing down. Not this time. He stepped closer. A son who disrespects his family doesn't deserve. He stopped. Maybe because he realized how bad the sentence was about to sound. Maybe because he realized I was waiting for him to finish it. Doesn't deserve what? I asked. He didn't answer. The silence said enough. Then my brother finally spoke. Look, man. I never asked for any of this. Part of me almost believed him. Until his wife jumped in. Well, now that it's an option, it would make such a huge difference for the children. The children. Every conversation somehow came back to the children. I turned to my brother. Are you seriously okay with taking my house? He avoided eye contact. Then he shrugged. A shrug. Like we were discussing borrowed lawn equipment. If mom and dad think it's best for the family? That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind that settles deep in your chest. The kind that's hard to undo. I pointed toward the street. Leave. Nobody moved. I pointed again. Now. Then I made myself perfectly clear. Anyone who comes onto this property again without permission will be removed by the police. For several seconds nobody said anything. Eventually the movers started carrying boxes back toward the truck. My mother was crying. My father looked furious. My brother looked embarrassed. And my sister-in-law looked like someone had stolen something she already considered hers. As they finally drove away, my mother rolled down the window and shouted one last thing. The basement is still being finished. As if that somehow changed everything. As if I would eventually come to my senses and move into it. I watched the truck disappear down the street. And standing there in my own driveway, I started realizing something I hadn't wanted to admit before. My parents weren't misunderstanding me. They understood perfectly. They just believed their opinion mattered more than my ownership. The last thing my mother yelled before their truck disappeared down the street was, "When you're ready to stop being stubborn, your room will be waiting." My room. Not my house. Not my life. My room. Like I was a teenager coming home from college instead of a grown man paying a mortgage. I wish I could say that was the end of it. It wasn't even close. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of notifications. At first I thought something had happened at work. Instead, I discovered I'd been added to a new family group chat. The title was, Helping Ethan Through This Transition. I wish I were kidding. Over 40 messages had already piled up. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly experts on my living situation. My aunt posted, "So proud of him for putting family first." My uncle wrote, "About time he stepped up and helped his brother." One cousin said, "The basement setup actually sounds pretty nice." Another added, "Free rent?" Most people would be grateful. I stared at the screen in disbelief. None of these people had spoken to me. Not one. They had simply accepted my parents' version of events as fact. Apparently, somewhere along the way, the story had become that I had already agreed and was now backing out. I typed one message. "I'm not moving. Nobody is getting my house. Anyone who comes onto my property without permission will be removed." Then I left the group. A few minutes later my mother texted me privately. "Your selfishness is destroying this family." I responded immediately. "No. Your refusal to respect boundaries is causing this." Her reply came seconds later. "So now family is about boundaries and property?" That word again. Property. As if ownership suddenly became offensive whenever it inconvenienced them. I sent back. "When people are trying to take my house, property becomes a pretty important topic." She never answered. At least not directly. Instead, I started taking precautions. I replaced every lock. Installed additional security cameras. Upgraded my alarm system. Most importantly, I spoke with a lawyer friend. He spent about 30 seconds listening before saying, "Legally? They don't have a case." That part wasn't surprising. The part that stuck with me was what he said next. "Keep records of everything." Everything. Texts, emails, voicemails, screenshots, just in case. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Looking back, he wasn't cautious enough. Meanwhile, my reputation within the family was being demolished. According to the story my parents were telling, I was a selfish tech worker who cared more about his computer than his own relatives. Nobody mentioned the years I spent working nights and weekends to build my career. Nobody mentioned the student loans I paid off. Nobody mentioned that I'd lived with roommates well into adulthood to save for a down payment. And nobody mentioned that I'd repeatedly offered to help my brother find higher-paying opportunities. He always declined. He hated technology. Didn't want office work. Didn't want to retrain. Which was completely his choice. But somehow his choices had become my responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house wasn't even huge. About 1,600 square feet. 3 bedrooms. A small yard. Nothing extravagant. Yet somehow I'd become the villain for living alone in it. The stress started bleeding into my work. I was distracted. I kept checking security cameras. Every notification made my stomach tighten. Eventually my manager noticed. During a one-on-one meeting she asked if everything was okay. So I explained. Not all the details. Just enough. By the time I finished she looked horrified. "Ethan, that's insane." Those were her exact words. Then she told me to take whatever time I needed. Apparently my employer had more respect for my career than my own family did. That realization hurt more than I expected. For about 2 weeks things quieted down. No surprise visits. No moving trucks. No basement updates. No guilt trips. Nothing. And that's where I made a mistake. I thought the situation was finally over. I thought maybe reality had finally caught up with everyone. I was wrong. They weren't giving up. They were reorganizing. What came next felt less like family drama and more like a coordinated campaign. It started online. My mother began posting constantly on social media. Articles about housing shortages. Posts about multi-generational households. Opinion pieces claiming young adults should move back home. Stories criticizing people who owned more house than they needed. And somehow I kept getting tagged in all of them. Every post came with little comments attached. Some people still understand family values. Community matters more than possessions. Children deserve space. Never mentioning me directly. Never naming names. Just enough for everyone to know exactly who she was talking about. Then the phone calls started. One relative after another. People who had never shown the slightest interest in my life suddenly wanted to discuss my moral obligations. My godmother called first. "Your mother is heartbroken." I said nothing. Would it really be so terrible to compromise? Compromise. Interesting word. Because nobody seemed interested in my side. Compromising involved losing my house. My uncle called next. "Back in my day, family helped family. I am helping family." How? By not letting them make terrible financial decisions based on entitlement. That conversation ended quickly. Then came my cousin. "Dude, just give them the house." I actually laughed. "You say that like you're telling me to lend them a lawnmower. It's just causing so much drama." That sentence stuck with me. Not because it was convincing. Because it revealed the real issue. People weren't upset that I was wrong. They were upset that I wasn't surrendering. Then things shifted into something even stranger. My sister-in-law launched a social media account. The entire page revolved around their cramped apartment and the challenges of raising 3 kids in a small space. Photos of crowded bedrooms. Videos of toys packed into corners. Posts about making sacrifices for family. On the surface, none of it mentioned me. But the timing wasn't exactly subtle. Neither were captions like, "Maybe someday we'll have enough room for everyone." Or, "Kids deserve space to grow." Or, "Still hoping for a miracle." Friends and relatives flooded the comments with sympathy. Every post gained attention. Every story painted them as struggling parents doing their best. And me? I was the invisible villain. The selfish relative standing between innocent children and a better life. At least that's the narrative they were building. And unfortunately, a lot of people were starting to believe it. Little did I know that social media campaign was only the beginning. Because someone in my family had started thinking of a much more direct way to get what they wanted. The social media campaign kept growing. Every week there were new posts. More photos. More emotional captions. More carefully crafted stories about sacrifice, hardship, and family. My sister-in-law became surprisingly good at it. She'd post pictures of the kids squeezed together during movie nights. Photos of toys stacked in closets. Stories about trying to stay positive despite limited space. The comments section became its own universe. Praying for a breakthrough. Those babies deserve better. God always makes a way. My mother was constantly in the comments. Not directly mentioning me. She was smarter than that. Instead, she'd write things like, "Family solutions are available when pride doesn't get in the way." Or, "The Lord provides opportunities. Not everyone is willing to accept them." Everyone knew exactly who she meant. Meanwhile, my life was becoming increasingly stressful. Work was entering one of the busiest periods I'd ever experienced. We were preparing for a major product launch and I was putting in 12-hour days regularly. My home office wasn't some luxury space. It was where I earned my living. It was where I managed projects, solved problems, and spent most of my waking hours. The idea of giving all of that up to move into my parents' basement was ridiculous. But apparently I was the only person who thought so. Then things crossed into territory I never could have predicted. One afternoon I came home from an in-person company meeting. As I turned onto my street, I immediately noticed something strange in my front yard. At first I thought maybe a neighbor was having a party. Then I got closer. My stomach dropped. There was a giant sign planted directly on my lawn. Read, "Future home of the Parker family." Below it were photos of my brother, his wife, and their children. Balloons were tied to my mailbox. Colorful streamers hung from my porch railing. Several neighbors were standing nearby taking pictures. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. For a few seconds I just sat in my car staring. Then I got out and started ripping everything down. The sign, the balloons, the decorations, every single piece. Unfortunately, I was already too late. My sister-in-law had posted photos online. Her caption read, "Claiming this blessing in faith," followed by hashtags about family, gratitude, and God's plan. Within hours, hundreds of people had seen it. People I had never met were congratulating my brother's family. Church members were praising my supposed generosity. Local parenting groups were calling me an amazing uncle. The worst part? None of it was true. I left a comment. Just one. "I'm not giving anyone my house. This needs to stop." The comment disappeared less than 10 minutes later. Before it vanished, however, my sister-in-law had already taken a screenshot. That screenshot somehow ended up circulating through family chats, accompanied by crying emojis, and messages about how hurtful my response had been. Apparently correcting a lie was now cruelty. A few days later things escalated again. I was in the middle of a video presentation with an important client when my security app alerted me to movement outside. I glanced at the camera feed. My father was wandering around my property carrying a clipboard. Actually carrying a clipboard. He was measuring windows, writing notes, walking around the side yard. I texted him immediately. "Leave. Right now." His response came back almost instantly. "Helping your brother plan some improvements." Improvements? To my house. I ended the presentation as quickly as possible and went outside. When I found him, he was kneeling near the backyard flower beds, holding a small shovel. "What are you doing?" He looked completely calm. "Testing the soil." "What?" "Your sister-in-law wants a vegetable garden." For a second I genuinely wondered whether this had become some kind of shared family delusion. "You are testing soil? For a garden? In a house that doesn't belong to her?" He sighed dramatically, as if I were the difficult one. "You always make everything into a confrontation." "No. You keep trespassing." That word seemed to offend him. He stood up and brushed dirt off his hands. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of this." I hated when he brought up Grandpa, especially because Grandpa would have been furious if anyone tried taking property that wasn't theirs. "He'd be ashamed that you think ownership doesn't matter." My father's jaw tightened. "Your grandfather worked with his hands. And I work with my brain." Silence. Then I pointed toward the street. "Leave." Eventually he did. But not before delivering one final comment over his shoulder. "The basement renovation is almost finished." As if that was somehow relevant. As if I was still considering it. Then came the moment that finally convinced me this situation was operating on a completely different level of reality. I woke up one morning and opened my front door. Attached to the handle was a realtor-style lockbox. For several seconds I just stared at it. Surely not. Surely they hadn't actually done that. I called my mother immediately. To my surprise, she sounded excited. "Oh good, you found it." "Found it? You put a lockbox on my house?" "We thought it would make things easier." "Easier for who?" "So your brother and his family can start bringing things over gradually." I honestly didn't know what to say. The sheer confidence was breathtaking. "The code is your birthday," she added helpfully. "We're all family." I hung up, grabbed bolt cutters from the garage, and removed the lockbox myself. Then I scheduled another locksmith visit. New locks. Additional security measures. Motion alerts. Everything. At that point I wasn't taking chances. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a law office. My heart immediately started racing. For the first time, I wondered if they were actually trying something legal. Some bizarre claim. Some challenge to ownership. Something. The reality turned out to be even stranger. Inside was a formal-looking packet. Prepared by an attorney. Or at least someone pretending to be one. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a lease agreement. A lease agreement. For my parents' basement. They had apparently designated part of the finished basement as a rental unit and expected me to move in. The paperwork outlined everything. Monthly rent. House rules. guest policies, shared bathroom access, kitchen privileges, noise restrictions. It even described the arrangement as a solution designed to preserve family harmony while respecting personal boundaries. I nearly laughed. Then I reached a section that made me stop. Because buried in the agreement was a clause that suggested what they had planned next. And reading it made me realize this wasn't ending anytime soon. The clause that caught my attention was buried near the end of the lease agreement. It stated that if I eventually chose to relinquish occupancy of my current residence, my parents would have first priority in helping facilitate the transition. Facilitate. Such a harmless word. Except everyone involved knew exactly what it meant. They weren't planning for a possibility. They were planning for an inevitability. In their minds, I hadn't said no. I was simply taking longer than expected to say yes. I forwarded the entire packet to my lawyer friend. A few minutes later he called me. The first thing I heard was laughter. Actual uncontrollable laughter. He had to put me on hold. When he finally returned, still trying not to laugh, he said, "Please tell me you're keeping copies of all this." "Obviously." "Good. Why?" "Because someday you're going to need proof that this really happened." Then he added, "Frame that lease agreement. Seriously. Put it on the wall." At that point I was laughing too. Because if I didn't laugh I'd probably lose my mind. The truth was, though, the whole situation was taking a toll. Work had become harder. Sleep was harder. Relaxing was impossible. Every unexpected notification made my stomach tighten. Every car slowing near my house got my attention. I was exhausted. Eventually my manager sat me down again. She'd noticed. Everyone had. I finally told her the full story. Not the shortened version. Everything. The moving truck. The lockbox. The basement lease. The social media campaign. The fake housing plans. The public pressure. The constant attempts to wear me down. By the time I finished, she looked genuinely disturbed. For a long moment she didn't say anything. Then she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Ethan, have you ever considered that this isn't really about the house?" "What do you mean?" She leaned back. "It sounds like they've spent years teaching you that your boundaries don't matter." I didn't answer. Because for the first time I wasn't sure she was wrong. The house was just the latest example. The biggest example. But maybe not the first. She encouraged me to take some time after our upcoming launch. Focus on myself. Talk to someone. Figure out what I wanted moving forward. Then she said something I'll probably never forget. "Your work matters. Your achievements matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I left that conversation thinking about it for days. Eventually I made a decision. I blocked everyone. My parents. My brother. My sister-in-law. Phone. Email. Social media. Everything. Before doing it, I sent one final message to the extended family group chat. It was short. "My career is real. My house is mine. I'm not moving. This is not a discussion anymore. Anyone who continues harassing me will be removed from my life." Then I left. And for the first time in months, silence. No texts. No calls. No guilt trips. No articles. No Facebook posts. No surprise visitors. Nothing. The difference was immediate. I could think again. I could focus again. I could work without checking security cameras every 15 minutes. The product launch went incredibly well. My team exceeded expectations. A few weeks later I received a promotion. One I'd spent years working toward. Sitting alone in my office that afternoon, I realized something strange. For months my family had treated my career like a joke. Yet that same career had paid for everything they wanted to take from me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life slowly started improving. I started therapy. At first I only intended to discuss the house situation. Instead we ended up talking about my entire childhood. Patterns I had never questioned suddenly became impossible to ignore. Good grades had always been expected. Success was luck. Achievements were minimized. Boundaries were selfish. Anything I accomplished somehow mattered less than everyone else's needs. The house wasn't the beginning. It was simply the moment I stopped accepting it. For nearly 2 months no one contacted me. I started believing the worst was finally over. Then a certified letter arrived. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. I opened it at the kitchen counter. By the second page I was laughing again. Not because it was funny. Because it was insane. Apparently my parents had organized what they called a family intervention. An actual intervention. For me. The packet included a proposed schedule. A list of concerns. Several recommendations. And some of the most absurd documents I have ever seen. First, there was a referral for a psychological evaluation due to my antisocial and irrational behavior. Second, there was information for a counselor specializing in gaming addiction, because apparently working in technology meant I must secretly be addicted to video games. Third, there was a detailed transition timeline outlining how I could gradually move into the basement apartment. Then came the photos. Dozens of them. The finished basement. Fresh paint. New furniture. Decorations. A nameplate attached to the bedroom door. My name. Like they were unveiling a model home. But none of that compared to the final document. The final document genuinely scared me. It was a power of attorney form. Pre-filled. With my parents listed as decision makers. The justification? Concerns regarding my recent judgment and inability to make rational housing decisions. I sat there staring at the page. For the first time, I stopped seeing this as merely ridiculous. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was obsession. I immediately contacted my lawyer friend. Within 24 hours, he connected me with a real estate attorney. An actual professional. Someone who was considerably less amused than we had been. After reviewing everything, the attorney drafted a cease and desist letter. And when I say strongly worded, I mean terrifyingly strong. It addressed every issue. The trespassing. The harassment. The attempts to interfere with my property. The bizarre questions regarding my mental competence. The unauthorized access attempts. Everything. The letter made one thing crystal clear. Any further actions would result in legal consequences. For the first time, my family was facing someone they couldn't guilt, manipulate, or pressure. An attorney only speaks one language. Documentation. Evidence. Facts. A week later we received a response. Oddly, it wasn't from my parents. It came from my sister-in-law's brother. A divorce attorney. According to him, the cease and desist was unnecessarily aggressive. He suggested mediation. Specifically, mediation to resolve what he called the family housing dispute. I read that phrase 3 times. Housing dispute. As if there were two competing claims. As if my ownership and their wishes somehow carried equal weight. That was when I realized something important. Even after months of rejection, legal warnings, blocked numbers, and public embarrassment, they still believed the house was negotiable. They still believed there was a conversation to be had. What I didn't know yet was that their final move would destroy any chance of repairing our relationship forever. The phrase family housing dispute kept bouncing around in my head. Because that was the core problem. Everyone involved kept acting like there were two valid sides to this argument. There weren't. One side owned a house. The other side wanted it. That should have been the end of the discussion. Instead, things somehow became even worse. After ignoring the mediation request, I upgraded my security system again. More cameras. Better motion detection. Remote monitoring. At the time, I felt ridiculous doing it. A month later, I was grateful I had. At 3:07 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone exploded with alerts. Motion detected. Backyard activity. Possible intrusion. Half asleep, I opened the security app. And immediately sat upright. 2 figures were moving around my back patio. One of them was my brother. The other was his wife. For a second my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then I watched my brother pull something from his pocket and start working on my back door. He was trying to force it open. My own brother. Trying to break into my house. I didn't hesitate. I called 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I watched the cameras. The entire thing felt unreal. Like I was watching someone else's life. When officers arrived, my brother immediately started shouting. "It's a misunderstanding." Then, "It's a family matter." And finally, "Our parents said we could be here." The statement that stuck with me, though, was the last one. This is our house. Not his house. Not the family house. Our house. Even after everything, they still believed it belonged to them. The officers disagreed. Both of them were arrested. I sat in silence after the patrol cars left. Not angry. Not even shocked anymore. Just tired. Completely exhausted. A few hours later, my parents somehow got hold of a neighbor's phone and called me. The moment I answered, screaming started. According to them, I had ruined my brother's future. I had traumatized the children. I had destroyed the family. The irony was unbelievable. My brother had literally attempted to break into my home. Yet somehow I was still the villain. The children, by the way, weren't even present. They had been staying with my sister-in-law's mother. A woman who, in hindsight, might have been the only rational adult involved in this entire mess. Apparently she'd refused from day one to participate in the house takeover fantasy. That break-in changed something in me. Up until then, I'd still been hoping there was some path back. Some eventual reconciliation. Some conversation that could fix things. Watching my brother try to force open my door at 3 in the morning killed that hope completely. I was done. A week later, I accepted a relocation package through work. I contacted a realtor, listed my house, and told absolutely nobody in my family. The house sold almost immediately, above asking price. The buyers were a young couple who genuinely loved it. Walking them through the property felt strangely emotional. Not because I was sad to leave, because they appreciated the home for what it was. A home. Not a prize. Not a resource. Not something to redistribute. Just a home. Closing was scheduled 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks were chaos. The closer reality got, the more desperate my family became. My mother showed up with a priest and attempted to perform a blessing ceremony for what she called the upcoming family transition. My father filed paperwork attempting to place a lien against my property for what he claimed were unpaid family obligations. Apparently raising me now came with invoices. My sister-in-law launched an online fundraiser built around the narrative that her children had been abandoned by a wealthy relative. My brother became increasingly obsessed. Neighbors reported seeing him drive past my house repeatedly, sometimes multiple times a day. The documentation folder my attorney had started became enormous. Photos, videos, police reports, messages, witness statements. Every week added something new. Then came the final act. The day before closing. I was already in Colorado. Most of my belongings had been shipped. I was sitting in a temporary apartment when my neighbor called. "You need to check your cameras." I opened the app, and there they were. My parents, a rental truck, a locksmith, bolt cutters, several storage bins. They were attempting to gain access to the property. Again. This time, however, they had a new argument. They claimed they had established residency. Oh. By mailing letters to themselves at my address. For weeks. Apparently they believed that receiving mail somewhere magically gave them tenant rights. I honestly wish I were making that up. I called the police from 1,000 miles away and watched everything unfold through my cameras. The officers were not impressed. Especially after hearing about the prior incidents. This time my parents were arrested as well. The next day, while they were still dealing with the consequences of that decision, my house officially changed ownership. By the time they were released, the property no longer belonged to me. Or them. The new owners moved in shortly afterward. I had a new phone number, a new address, and a new life. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've heard occasional updates through one relative who still seems grounded in reality. Apparently my brother and his wife are separating. Years of problems surfaced once they no longer had me to blame. My parents are drowning in legal expenses. The basement renovation they were so proud of left them deep in debt. And the social media campaign eventually collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. As for me, Colorado has been good to me. I have a new house, a better position at work, a home office with mountain views. Most importantly, I have peace. Real peace. The kind I didn't realize I'd been missing. Therapy has helped me understand something important. The house was never really the issue. It was control. The house simply forced the conflict into the open. My parents couldn't accept that I was an adult whose decisions didn't require their approval. And when I refused to surrender, everything escalated. Sometimes I feel sad about it. Not because I miss the chaos. Because I miss the family I thought I had. The version of them that existed in my head. The version that respected me. The version that was proud of me. That family never really existed. My therapist recently asked whether I regretted anything. I thought about it for a long time. The answer surprised me. I don't regret calling the police. I don't regret selling the house. I don't regret moving. I don't regret choosing distance. My only regret is how long it took me to recognize the pattern. How many years I spent explaining, defending, and justifying myself to people who had already decided my boundaries didn't matter. Still, every now and then, usually late at night, I wonder whether I should have handled some of it differently. Maybe there was a conversation I missed. Maybe there was a point where things could have been salvaged. Or maybe I'm just grieving something that was already broken long before the house ever entered the picture. So, AITA for calling the police on my family, selling my house, and moving across the country without telling them?